You're listening to BFM 89.9, the business station.
In the studios to talk to me today is David Hashim, founding principal of Veritas. Should I say Veritas Group?
Veritas Design Group.
Veritas Design Group. So you'd rather be known as someone design rather than architect. The initial start was in architecture.
That's right. But we began to think of architecture in a larger context as part of the design field, which of course includes many other disciplines such as landscape, interior design, and the overall planning of larger contexts.
Yeah, I know there are listeners out there listening to you, especially here in Kuala Lumpur, saying that they're looking at the very ad hoc landscape that is Kuala Lumpur. And there is someone who's actually looking at that, but we'll come to that a little bit later on. Tell us a little bit about Veritas. Is that a nod towards modernism, or is that a reflection back to the MIT days of the Forum?
Well, the name Veritas itself is kind of indicative of our approach to our work. It's an old Latin word, and it means truth in Latin. Yes. And that has been more or less our approach to design from when I started the company back in 1987. That we take a very serious approach to looking at what we do and why we do it. And it's not something flippant. It's not something indiscriminate. It's something that's very thoughtful and intended. So we like to say that we take a very truthful approach to design.
Interesting. Now, I mean, with a lot of people, when they thought, we talk about architecture, don't talk about truth. They talk about lines, maybe they talk about light. They talk about the use of space, spatial sort of concepts. But they're saying that, truth is what we're going to be guided by is really interesting. And you started this early on in the picture. You graduated, and then very soon after that, you said, why not, learn at the feet of gurus? Were you one of those young upstarts and I'm paving my own way, I've got my own ideas, and I don't want to do what everybody else has done? An Ezra Pound kind of,
One of, I think, my strengths or my weaknesses, whichever way you look at it, is I have a pretty healthy ego. Right. And I'd done some training when I was still studying. And I always felt that the people I worked for didn't know as much as I did.
Right.
So I realized, and I didn't get along well with my so-called bosses when I was doing my training. And I realized that I had no future to be an employee.
Right.
I had no choice, in a sense, that once I graduated, I had no choice but to start my own firm. And I did it right after graduating. So in fact, I've never worked for anybody in a permanent job. And so we started in 1987 after I graduated, literally within weeks after I came back to Kuala Lumpur. And that itself was kind of an interesting story because I'd actually not planned to start my company right away. I had planned to work in New York, and I had a great job lined up, and I was going to work on some very interesting things. But I came back in 1987, which was the depth of the recession. And just by coincidence, I met a prominent developer at that time who was a friend of my father. And he convinced me not to go back to New York. He said, the future is here. The future is in Malaysia. And the time is now. The time is now. Which shocked me because things were terrible in 1987. They were far worse than they were in 1997, or even far worse than they are even now. And here I was about to start a company in the depth of a recession. He said, David, there's only one way you can go, and that is up. And I'll never forget that. Until now, I thank him for his words of advice. If not for him, I would not have done what I did.
Well, the people who know you who sort of said that the thing was not so much that that there was advice that was given to you, because a lot of people had advised you, but the fact that you took that advice, referring back to your own admission about your ego, they said the fact that David is sort of like, oh, okay, that sounds like something, that makes sense, and I'll take that advice. And of course, they're saying that in reference not only to you, but knowing all the boys growing up in your family, whether it's around the pools of RSGC or wherever else you were creating havoc. But yeah, that's a whole different interview and a whole different time. Let's talk about, fast forward now, where is Veritas now? It's got a nationwide presence before we go into the international presence. Nationwide, so here in Kuala Lumpur, where you started, and then up in Penang and Johor as well.
Actually, we opened in Johor. Everyone thought they were trying to get a piece of the Iskandar development region. The actual fact is, I'd always wanted to have an office in the south. Part of the country where we'd always done some work, but I always wanted to have a representation there because one thing about Johor, the people in Johor are very, what's the right politically correct word to use. They like to work amongst themselves. And if I fly into Johor Bahru for the day and try to get my plans approved, the local authorities don't take it very well. Right. So I was lucky to meet a wonderful chap, Anak Johor, no less. And I said, great, let's do this together. And this was several months before the IDR was even announced. And so we were up and running, and 2 or 3 months later, they announced this big Iskandar development region, Nusa Jaya, and of course, we've been the beneficiary of that because we've been there. So yes, we've had our Penang office ever since about almost 20 years now. The fact that my family comes from Penang was a bit of an encouragement to do that, and Johor, and we plan to have an office in Sabah. We planned that for a while, and this basically covers the country. Over the years, we've also expanded, like you mentioned, about the range of work we do. And I've always felt this is not going outside my core abilities, because it's all design. So we are primarily architects, of course, but we have interior design people, we have landscape design people, we have planning and urban design people. And recently we started a quantity surveying firm to support the activities of all these firms. So that's our Malaysian activities now.
Yeah, one of the other questions that people sort of say when I ask them about you, and they were like, yeah, what hasn't he started? You know, he's done everything. You can call him an entrepreneur, you can call him an architect, a design specialist, you can say he's a venture capitalist because he's done that, he's been into technology, ISP provider. He says the list is, well, it doesn't end. They say, okay, Dubai made sense to a lot of people, but Ho Chi Minh City?
Yeah, well, it was a few years ago that we realized that the way to penetrate the international market seriously was not to just do hit and miss projects in different countries, but to actually have a physical representation in those countries. The first one was Dubai, and then followed by our offices in Ho Chi Minh City, our offices in, don't be too surprised, Tehran, okay, which is actually a great opportunity.
Okay.
And this year we're planning to open our offices in India to tap the huge market there. So this has been our strategy to get into these countries. What we usually do is we'll wait for an invitation to do a project or two, and once we get that, then we'll put somebody there permanently, and then before you know it, that person's hired 1 or 2 people, and before you know it, we have full-fledged offices there. And that's what we've done, and that's been our strategy, and it's done quite well. And you asked me about Ho Chi Minh City. Well, you know, the whole world's going through a tough time right now, and Vietnam is no exception. But smart developers always plan for the change in the weather. And now we are working for, top-notch developers who are getting all their pieces in place, all their ducks in a row, so that when times change, they can launch and beat the market. So we're very busy in Vietnam, and actually we're very busy in Iran, we're very busy in even UAE. Well, what happened in UAE